and welcome to episode 78 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast for the casual spike, focused on the latest decks, trends, strategies, and cards in Modern and Pioneer. My name is Stanislav here in Chicago, and with me on the line from Denver, Colorado, it's the one and only Shane Beeps.
Stanislav, I like this sort of like casual 90s look you got going on today. Like you just got done with your shift. I don't even know where. The 7-Eleven with Silent Bob and Jay. Is it Silent Jay and Loud Bob?
That's it.
No, it's not it.
Bob is very loud and outspoken.
Okay.
Yeah, the dream of the 90s is alive on the Dive Down today.
In your wardrobe.
Also with us, the Godfather, Dave Harbarger.
I have a question for you guys today. So, I've been cooking a lot lately. We're kind of coming down to the end of our provisions. I'm trying to make the best of, what's been in the cabinet and all that kind of stuff because nobody's going out. You guys know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh, sure.
So I came up with a recipe and decided to Google it for some validation to see if anybody else had come up with it. Should I be worried that Guy Fieri came up with the same recipe that I came up with? You think? Or is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
Guy Fieri is a acclaimed chef.
And a good man. So it sounds like you're in good company, Dave.
Dave, what's the recipe, though?
I marinated a flank steak in a Bloody Mary.
And donkey sauce.
No, in a Bloody Mary. For real. It was very good. It really worked.
Sounds killer.
It was great. Shane, the last time you were here, you made me buy all this Zing Zang.
Oh, it's so good.
And I didn't have anything to do with it. So I was like, I'm just going to use it for something. And it worked. Little tip from me to you.
I'm going to do some tofu marinade in that.
How do you cook the steak?
I mean, grilled still.
Rare? Medium rare?
I mean, yeah, with a flank steak, you don't want to have it be too rare because it's super chewy.
Yeah.
But, I like it. I like it as rare as you can have it.
Huh. Today I learned. On this week's episode, we start with a quick breakdown to look at the last two Pioneer challenges and get a glimpse of the weekend's surprisingly open Pioneer metagame. Is the format more dynamic than we've been giving it credit for? Stay tuned to find out.
Not us, but maybe everybody else.
Then we head into the Dive Down where we conclude our picks to click bonanza for Core Set 21, the highly anticipated sequel to last summer's Core Set 20. But first, some housekeeping. Hello, welcome, and thank you to the newest patrons to join the Dive Down Nation. This week's shout-outs go to Daryl P. and Andrew C. Thanks so much for supporting the show. It means a lot to us. If you'd like to support the show, you can find us over at patreon.com/thedivedown. Got a variety of perks, gifts. If you're, have extra money, maybe you could throw some of that extra cash towards a charity that is important to you. I mean, I think there's a lot of good causes to support right now to, either help people because they're sick and struggling with COVID or to help people because they have been dealt a bad deal with like social political injustice at the hands of police and, other societal factors that, we've talked about a little bit before. Yeah, but if you're looking to support us specifically, of course, you can find us at patreon.com/thedivedown.
We are also brought to you in part by Mana Traders. It is a service that we have used for a very long time for renting Magic Online cards before they were even a sponsor of the show. They thankfully now are a sponsor, and it's been awesome. They're awesome to work with. The renting the cards is super fast. They are even moving away from the mana hour system just to be kind of like, hey, we trust you with these cards. So use them and give them back when you can. Don't keep them too long. And that's pretty cool. Makes it a lot easier to use, less stress. If you want to sign up for Mana Traders to rent Magic Online cards, you can go to manatraders.com and use sign-up code THEDIVEDOWN, all one word. And we get a little bit of kickback from that, and that's super helpful. So thanks.
All right, with all that out of the way, I'm just going to toss it right back to Shane, who's at the news desk this week.
So I think if you had been listening to some Pioneer chatter this past week or so since the companion nerf, I think people have been feeling pretty down on Pioneer at the moment. I think that people were hoping that something new, something different might appear after the companion nerf, but initial findings looked like, oh, cool, 25% of our metagame is Inverter.
Yeah, and our meta-analysis found that last week. I think anecdotally, it looks like there's not that many people in the Pioneer League right now on Moto. Like maybe there's only 400 or 500. There's over 900 in the Modern League right now, which isn't giant either, but double is kind of a surprise.
And I think there was this like brief golden era for Pioneer when it was still a newer format where, you could make the argument that it was actually just the most popular format in Magic for a minute there. And I think we've kind of seen that maybe level out for organic reasons. But, as Shane alluded to, there seems to be like a little bit of public sentiment about the health of Pioneer being in a poor place right now.
Yeah, I think part of that is people just sort of seem discouraged about, what decks can I realistically play that are both fun and powerful right now to play in Pioneer. But I'm here to give you a brief and yet hopefully substantial ray of light into the world of Pioneer, the results of the two most recent Pioneer challenges. So what I'm going to do, run down the top 8s from both these events. We'll have a really quick metagame breakdown and assessment, and then move on to the fun stuff in Core Set 2021. So Saturday the 13th, we have Jabberwocky on Sultai mid-range in first place, featuring 3 Shark Typhoons. Kind of just useful card in a lot of these mid-range and control decks now, right?
Draws a card, leaves a body.
Why not?
Sign me up.
Second place, Fistful of Metal on Simic Ramp. Kind of going back to a deck we haven't seen for many months now, I think, realistically. Some big ramp targets in this. Kozilek the Great Distortion as a 2 of.
Ooh.
A really interesting inclusion is Unexpected Results, which is a sorcery, 2 green, blue. Has you shuffle your library, reveal the top card. If it isn't a land card, you get to cast it for free. If it is a land card, you put that onto the battlefield, and you get to put Unexpected Results back into your hand. Why not? Dave, you have been playing Magic longer than Stan and I, and this card's from what, Gatecrash?
Yeah.
Why hasn't this card really been seeing a lot of play, do you think? Just too random? Not reliable enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's totally it. I had to look it up just now to remind myself of what the art looked like. Even it is an interesting card, but yeah, I think sometimes you kind of hit a giant payoff, and sometimes you hit nothing. If you can establish really early a big mana advantage, it seems like you could find worse mana sinks.
It's interesting that this card is considered powerful enough to be a 4 of in this deck. So keep your eye on Unexpected Results. Maybe it has a place in the meta, especially in Simic Ramp here.
Yeah, I think the bigger thing that's in this deck that people should keep an eye on is Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, which is a card that is powerful, kind of filling that Tron spot in Pioneer. So I think if there's time to play it, you'll start seeing more decks that are built around using it.
Third place, Usung on Is It in Soul? Not splashing any white here for a Jeskai or anything like that. Featuring 2 dive downs in the main. So there you go.
Yes!
New tier 1 staple.
We did it!
Dive down.
Usong, we see you.
Yeah, we see you. And we'll see Usung in the next top 8. So there's a little bit of a tease there. Fourth place, Nuclear Atom on Boros Heroic. Notice I did not use the word Feather because Feather is not in the deck. And I think that's pretty common nowadays, just a Boros Heroic beatdown deck. Fifth place, Kaminuma on Mono White Devotion featuring Karn the Great Creator. Sixth place, Japanese Fisherman on 5-color Niv Mizzet. Seventh place, Krebovich on Esper Super Friends Control featuring Yorion as the companion. There's none in the main. Eighth place, Showtime on Chonkish Red. So this sort of tops out at 3 Torbran. I sort of look at Glorybringer as like the chonky threshold. Like once you have Glorybringer, you're into the chonk zone. But before that, you're just kind of like a mid-range red deck.
And this deck has no Glory Bringers?
Yeah, none. So it's kind of like the deck that I ran at the Pioneer GP down in Phoenix, which is just, an aggressive red deck that topped off at Torbran for the value there, just trying to keep the curve fairly low. Sunday the 14th, let's go through this top 8. Indian Pancake on Dimir Inverter. Don't look too closely here, okay? We'll just go past that. Second place, though, we have Usung. Again, ran it back. The Is It in Soul deck with 2 dive downs. Third place on Saturday, second place on Sunday. Way to go. Killing it with Is It in Soul.
All right, so dive down. Basically functions as an alternative to Stubborn Denial here. And I think that's really cool and interesting because Stubborn Denial has a floor. You know, sometimes you can't get the Ferocious off of it because you're not trying to protect something that is ensouled yet. And I kind of love Dive Down as like a solution to that problem where it's always going to give your creature hexproof versus Stubby D, which like sometimes whiffs. But on the other hand, sometimes Stubby D can also deal with like non-removal spells and can counter a planeswalker or whatever.
Yeah, I think this is more just on game plan, right? Like you said, it's like my goal is to suit up an artifact creature. And if I'm suiting up my first artifact creature, I don't have Stubborn Denial ready to go. I don't want to get blown out, get 2-for-1 with a shock, you know, hitting something. So Dive Down makes a lot of sense here.
Yeah, if only we could send our patrons signed copies of MTGO cards.
Third place, we have got Claudio on Azorius Control. A lot of little interesting inclusions here. I mean, there might not be super weird, but there's also 3 Sharknadoes in there. So staple, you know, big blue controlling card at this point. Fourth place, P. Proteus on Boros Burn. Fifth place, CWS on Lotus Breach. Sixth place, Mizkinbolic on Bant Spirits. And this is kind of going back to that like playset tribal Bant Spirits, just 4 of everything, including Collected Company, and 24 lands, I believe. So play all the good creatures and flyers that you can. I think it's all spirits except for Brazen Borrower.
Which is a 1 of?
No, there's 4 of. It's 4 of everything, friend.
It has 4 borrowers too?
4 of everything.
Wow, the list I'm running in Pioneer right now only has 1 as a spicy.
7th place, BN Trusty 14 on Mono Black Vampires. 8th place, Jackal on Sultai Midrange. So, top 8 takeaways. We only have 1 Dimir Inverter. Not so bad. A decent amount of Uro. Nothing too scary with the level of Uro dumb here. 14 different decks in our top 16s, or top 16, the 2 top 8s here. And 1 is the same person. So that's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, worth noting too that there's only a couple of decks with companions. Both of the Boros decks were running Lurrus as a companion. The Burn deck and the Heroic non-Feather deck were both running Lurrus, which kind of explains where Feather went off to. So that's pretty cool. And then, like you mentioned, there's 1 or 2 Yorion decks as well. So it's not going way over the top.
Yeah, I like it. I think it looks healthy. Let's talk about our quick top 32 metagame assessment, the combined top 32s of these 2 mini tournaments. So we had Dimir Inverter at 17%, Black Vampires at 11%, Mono Red at 11%, Mono White Devotion at 8%, Esper Control at 6%, Lotus Breach at 6%, Sultai Delirium about 5%, Niv 2 Light about 5%, Boros Burn about 5%, Naya Midrange, which has to be the Winota decks, correct?
I think so.
And we kind of get into like our 3% and whatnot of Mono Black, Is It in Soul, Bant Spirits, things like that, sort of the more fringy tier 2-ish type stuff. But I like this. I mean, Dimir Inverter at 17 is still not amazing, but we see a lot of different decks holding their own here and showing up in these top 32s. We have 15 plus different decks that are holding their own. They're making top 8s in these tournaments. That's a lot of stuff to choose from.
Yeah, big drop for Lotus Breach week over week, where it went from being just like hands down the second most popular deck to now in 6th place or so?
Yeah, that's right, Stan. I think what's interesting here is I think that people are really shoring up their sideboards to fight combo. Mm-hmm. But that's unfortunate because if you consider Dimir Inverter a combo deck, we're still not losing a huge metagame share here. I mean, 7-ish% since last week is significant. But it's still saying I'm trying to shore up my combo matchup. I'm putting in things like Drill Bits. I'm putting in things like Soul Guide Lantern, like Lost Legacy. That's the kind of stuff we're seeing in Mono Black Vampires, for instance, which is our second place deck. So they're really trying to shore up these matchups against things like Lotus Breach, against things like Dimir Inverter. And they're doing well for it. I mean, 11% for Black Vampires. That's a lot.
Yeah. Big leap with that deck.
So get those Sorens now, if you're into those kind of strategies. If you've been just into Mono Black, maybe it's time to say, I'll spread my wings a little bit. Get some more Vampire Lords and Vampire Planeswalkers.
I think it is a little unfortunate that Inverter is so hard to interact with. you know, if you have Mystical Dispute, that's good, but they can dispute your dispute. They often do. Otherwise, you kind of need these like super surgical, get this card out of the person's library tools. And those are only really available in like black or blue-black.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like dealing with Inverter is just really challenging for where the Pioneer metagame is now. And I find that a little disheartening. I think that's what a lot of people find a little disheartening about the format in particular.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, I think it's probably fair to say that if you take a little off the top of your Inverter somehow, either if you ban Inverter, the deck's dead. If you try to take something else out of it, it might make it more fair. And then I think we have a pretty flat-ish, slight ramp up to the best decks in the format. I think people would be pretty happy. But I think that it's also safe to say that there are strategies you can play that are not Inverter, and they can be in a variety of colors. I mean, even we have Esper Control at 6% right now, and that's an interesting, somewhat new deck. I'm sure that leverages Yorion by and large, and a lot of Planeswalkers. So if you want a controlling strategy, go for it.
So all this being said, we are currently running, Trevor from our Patreon Slack is currently running a Pioneer tournament. What are we all playing in the tournament?
Spooky undead people in Bant colors.
Yeah, you both are running spooky lads and lasses, right?
Yep. Who would have thought Stan and I would pick the same deck? It's never happened before.
Very unusual. You know what I'm running.
This time we didn't talk about it though, Dave. I think it kind of happened coincidentally. Though we did on our last breakdown last week say like, yeah, I know I said I'd play Spirits in Pioneer right now.
I think I said I would play Jeskai Luca.
You did.
Which I decided not to just because I wanted to save some brain power in this league. So I was just poking around and saw that Spirits did well in one of these challenges and grabbed a list and went for it. And then I realized that 4 people out of the people in our community tournament are on Spirits. So,
I mean, we have a bunch of Spirits fans in there. Yeah, I'm of course running Aspiring Spikes green splashing white Planeswalker deck because I want to mess with that deck again. So why not?
Have you played your first match, Shane?
No, I've built a deck all weekend and I prepared for this episode. So I haven't had time yet. But yeah, I'm actually playing Trevor, so he can get on me to move this tournament along.
Did we see any of this green walkers in the like 6% other category from the top 32?
Nope. No green walkers. So it had a brief flash last week. It was in the top 8. I think it was 7th place in one of our tournaments, but it was not here this week. So remains to be seen.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll top 8 with it. So.
Hey, I'll see you up there. Maybe you too, Dave. All right. That wraps up our very quick breakdown. Thanks, Shane. I mean, even though I've expressed frustration with Inverter in particular, I do think Pioneer is still pretty fun. The fact that like Ensoul is still a playable deck means a lot to me for personal reasons. And like Bant Spirits does give you this like fun tempo controller strategy. Like any chance to play Spell Queller is right by me. So I have faith, and we're going to keep an eye on this format in the weeks to come and kind of see where it goes, especially after Court 21, which I think marks the first break of this episode.
Such a smooth transition, Stan.
Thank you. I came up with it on the spot. We're going to take a quick breather, and when we return, we are going to keep talking about new cards. Goblins, angels, humans, oh my. Stay with us. And we're back, and I'm excited to lead with one of the spiciest cards in this new set. It's got a lot of people talking. We want to talk about it. I'm sure you're expecting us to talk about it. We're going to tell you what this card is. Everyone's discussing it. What could it be?
What are we doing this week on the dive down?
We're talking about cards from Core Set 21. Cards that we think are interesting, maybe some friendly debate. I don't know if we're going to debate this next card. I'm excited to tell you what it is. I'm excited for the listeners to hear us talking about it. I think we have some interesting points.
But our tone of this episode overall is going to be kind of loose and fun, right?
Dave, before we get into this card, that Stan keeps hinting at. Can we talk about your AC a little bit? How you doing?
I'm fine.
All right, it's Conspicuous Snoop. Snoop to Snoop. RR for a Goblin Rogue that reads, play with the top card of your library revealed. You may cast Goblin spells from the top of your library, so sleeve up those tar fires. As long as the top card of your library is a Goblin card, not necessarily a creature, any Goblin card. Conspicuous Snoop has all activated abilities of that card, and the Snoop is a 2/2.
Okay, this can do some stuff.
This can do some stuff. That's a lot of text.
For RR, it's a ton of text, right?
Yeah. And as soon as this card was spoiled, the combos, they were a-flowing. And we want to talk about basically the combo that has everyone talking, since it is a turn 3 kill in Modern on day 1. Turn 1 land. Ideally a red source.
We did it. That's the combo. Turn 1 mountain. Play it.
You need those to cast your spells.
It could be an Auntie's Hovel. Turn 2, another red source land, and then you cast the Snoop, and then you reveal the top card of your library. Turn 3, you play another land, and then you have to cast a Bogart David Harbinger, which is an old card from Lorwyn. It's 2 and a black for a Goblin Shaman. When Harbinger comes into play, you may search your library for a Goblin card, reveal it, shuffle your library, and put that card on top.
Right.
Okay. Oh, that just works so cleanly.
Tricky.
So, what do you guys think you're putting on top with Harbinger?
Rabblemaster.
My favorite card, Kiki Jiki.
The Mirror Breaker. That's right. So here's how the combo works. When you put Kiki Jiki on top, Snoop now has the ability to tap and make a combo. And you do that repeatedly, making copies of Snoop after Snoop after Snoop after Snoop. But they're all tapped, right? This isn't Deceiver Exarch territory where they're all untapped or whatever. Finally, you have one untapped Snoop after you've created enough bodies to make a copy of the Bogart Harbinger. All right, that card does come in handy. And then you fetch a new card to put on top of your library. It could be something like Sling Gang Lieutenant, which you may recall from Modern Masters, 3 and a black for a 1/1 Goblin. When Lieutenant enters the battlefield, you make some tokens. That doesn't matter. It also has this line of text: sacrifice a Goblin, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So you sack all of your Snoop copies to the Sling Gang Lieutenant, Snoop, and you just went on the spot.
That's right. You can also bring up Mog Fanatic, which has sacrifice to deal 1 damage to target. And so you can go that way instead if you want to. Then all of your Snoops have their own sack ability. You sack them all, and there they go. But it is a turn 3 2-card combo for a kill. Now, Stan, are you excited about this card?
Yeah, I think this card's pretty interesting. And, people are making like deck lists for it already. Jim Davis has a great article on Cool Stuff Inc. that imagines Snoop in like 3 different shells. I think there's different ways to add redundancy to a deck like this. I don't think we're going to go into all of the ways that this deck can be built, but the point I'm trying to make is like, it's flexible. It's probably going to end up in some kind of Goblin shell, but there's different types of ways to make the kill possible.
Yeah, I think you're going to see people playing around with, in a Goblins deck that's aggressive, having this kill that as a kind of like plan B. I think you're going to see it in a maybe like Grixis Twin-esque shell with some disruption instead of having a bunch of Goblins where you're just kind of all in on the combo, but along with a kind of controlling strategy. I think people are going to try all kinds of things with this combo because it is not many cards, which is the thing that Jim Davis also mentions in a YouTube video he made.
Yeah, this is the kind of card people want to play, right? This is the kind of card that people want to mess with and put into some tricky Goblin decks. Whether or not, it's not even necessarily needs to be in a combo deck. It's definitely better in a combo deck, but just playing Goblins off the top of your library, super cool. If you have any kind of way to do any kind of filtering or get rid of cards you don't want on the top, like you can fetch away stuff that's like a bad draw, all that kind of stuff is valuable. I think it's probably better in a combo type strategy, but it's an interesting piece of value for sure.
Sleeve, believer, heave, guys.
I think it's going to be sleeved.
Sleeve.
I think that I don't know if it's going to make something that's new and busted or like a new tier deck, but it will see play.
Yeah, I mean, I have a little bit of question as to whether this is better than the Grumgully combo or not, which is something that popped up around the time that Eldraine came out. Uses a couple of pieces from Modern Horizons and Eldraine to do an infinite damage combo in a Goblin Shell. You get to use Goblin Matron and stuff like that. I don't know. That one feels a little more resilient than this combo, but this one is very fast. Turn 3 is very fast. So we'll see.
I mean, this card just dies though, right? Like it just dies to a lot of stuff.
Yep. Dies to literally everything.
A hard wind.
Yeah, I think that's one of the good things about a card like this. Very, very powerful, but really easy to disrupt. And on the one hand, like, there's going to be a bunch of people who will see this card and kind of know that they lose on the spot. But maybe this could, like, if this deck, whatever deck this ends up in, gets popular, it might encourage people to play a little bit more interactive Magic, which, you know, a lot of people tend to enjoy when Magic gets more interactive, a little closer to mid-range. Yeah, and like, I wonder if this deck can now play Scheming Symmetry as maybe your turn one way to like fetch one of your 2 combo pieces. And, you know, find redundancy that way, because you don't have a lot of ways to kind of like fetch up specific creatures in red, black colors.
Stan, before we move on from this card, I just have to say, I love how many times you said Snoop. And I'm imagining now that in this art, he's like looking into the kitchen and wanting to cook with Martha Stewart.
Yeah. This is the type of card, I think, even though there's like this obvious combo for it, this like strikes me as a card that we haven't even seen like the iceberg from the tip. You know what I mean? Like the Kiki Jiki combo is obvious, but I feel like given enough time, someone's going to break it into something even more broken.
Could happen. There's always a chance that something different is going to appear.
For sure.
All right.
Cards are fun.
Let's move on, because I think that was one of the big headline cards. I will go to a card. I have a question for you all. I have 2 cards I want to talk about really quickly that just got spoiled today. So I'm going to take us off script and get instant reactions, real-time reactions. It's Monday, as people, listeners may know. And 2 ghostly 2-drops were spoiled today. One is called Ghostly Pilferer. It is a generic in a blue for a Spirit Rogue 2/1. Whenever Ghostly Pilferer becomes untapped, you may draw 2. If you do, draw a card. Whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, draw a card. Discard a card. Ghostly Pilferer can't be blocked this turn. And then the other one is called Shacklegeist, and it is also a generic in a blue, a 2/2 flying. Shacklegeist can only block creatures with flying. Tap 2 untapped spirits you control. Tap target creature you don't control. Yeah. All of us have messed with spirits at one time or another. What do we think about these cards for Pioneer or Modern spirits or anything? You want to start with the Shacklegeist?
Yeah, because the other one's probably unplayable.
Interesting. I wonder if it's the other way, but let's see.
Yeah, so Shacklegeist is kind of like a Nebelgast Herald type effect, but my issue with it is that you have to tap untapped spirits you control to then tap something down on the other side, whereas Nebelgast is just like a really easy to enable trigger. Like a resolved Nebelgast Herald on the other side of the battlefield in Pioneer Spirits sure does stink to play against if you're in any kind of like aggressive creature deck, I think, because it's just like, because it gives there's flash typically, there's creatures coming in and tapping your stuff down, we're not expecting it. That's kind of a bummer. With Shacklegeist, we're at the 2-drop spot, which, if I remember correctly, has some competition, right? Like there's Selfless Spirit, there's the Supreme Pizza Lord, there's Rattle Chains.
That's it. Those 3.
Yeah.
Yep.
Those are good cards.
They're all good cards. I mean, I guess my main thing here is like, is the discount in CMC, lowering that curve a little bit, worth it to get something that might be a little less powerful than Nebelgast Herald? I personally think that the activated ability on Shacklegeist has some upside too, in the sense that you can use it to tap more than one creature down, because it is not a tap ability. It's just an activated ability with a colon. So if you have a huge board of spirits, you have 4 spirits out, you can tap down 2 of your opponent's creatures and sneak through. If you have more somehow, you can keep going. So in some ways, there are situations where you get Nebelgast Herald out and that's the only thing that you tap, and then you never, you run out of gas or something like that. So I think there are pluses and minuses here.
That's a good point. I think that it's on the bubble. It definitely doesn't scream like immediately insert me into the deck. I think there are opportunities for making more creatures than Spirits currently does. Like maybe there are token generators that aren't currently being employed. And like this is a deck that this is a card that can go into a deck that's trying to make even more creatures in the typical Spirits deck. So you have some throwaway spirits or spirit tokens that aren't quite as valuable. So you're sort of getting rid of their large flying blocker to get tons of damage in or something like that.
We talked a little bit about the 2 CMC slot in Spirits, but if Shacklegeist sees play, my guess is that if replaces anything, it might be just Spectral Sailor.
Yeah, Spectral's just one of those things that it gives you kind of a little bit of a long game, which is nice. And Spectral Sailor has Flash, if I remember correctly, right?
It does.
Yeah, which is nice with Nebelgast Herald and
Mausoleum Wanderer too. There's some synergy there, but Rattle Chains is in there to give everything Flash. So, and that's an important aspect to the deck too. Why don't we talk about another card that might replace a little bit of what Spectral Sailor does, and that is Ghostly Pilferer. Now, as Stan noted a minute ago, this is a weird spirit that does not have flying.
Which, that should be illegal.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's more of a rogue than it's more of a rogue than a flying spirit, I think, in terms of card design.
I just think that if you're an astral projection, you're not held down by gravity.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
I don't think that's a hot take.
I mean, even Slimer flies.
In 2020, nobody's held down by gravity. We're all flying.
Okay, so when you untap it, you can pay 2. So that's often. That's every time you untap it, you get 2. So on your turn, if you attach with it, you can pay 2, which is not insignificant. You can draw a card. So it's a good way to, if you run out of gas, it's cheaper than the Spectral Sailor activated ability. Whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, draw a card. That's happening surprisingly more often these days, casting spells from the graveyard. It's still not ubiquitous, but it's certainly something that we're seeing a lot of. Kroxa, Euro.
Don't forget that it is not just your graveyard, right? It synergizes with other things as well. And we'll talk about that later with a different thing, but Light Up the Stage counts as not casting it from your hand, and Cascade counts as not casting it from your hand. Not that I think this might sniff modern, but there's other things that it comes from. I do like this kind of loot ability, and then occasionally getting this gravy of just like incidental hate that you draw a card off of, where if your opponent gets an advantage, you get to keep up.
What's funny is it's kind of because it has the word spirit, I think people's brainstorming immediately goes to Pioneer or Modern Spirits, but I think this is actually potentially better in like a blue tempo deck where like you can suit this up with like a Curious Obsession or something like that, and then you can discard maybe a land you don't need or something that you can get back from the graveyard. Can't be blocked. You're getting that damage in. You're drawing a card. You untap with it. You pay some mana. You're drawing another card. And that's advantageous. I don't know if it's outrageous, but it's certainly an opportunity for a blue tempo deck.
Advantageous, but not outrageous. That's a new dive down button made on the air for you.
That's the slogan from Gem, right? Truly advantageous, but not outrageous.
Yeah. That's for her post-rock career when she was in law school.
Shane, I like the point you're making that this doesn't have to go into a spirits deck. And I'll admit, I sort of fell into the trap of thinking like that's where this is going to want to go. I do like the design of this card and the kind of like the balance between you drawing extra cards and then it giving you value for discarding them. And when I was thinking about this in spirits, I was thinking like all you'd really ever want to discard is probably extra lands.
Yeah.
Then on the other hand, this is kind of a mana sink because like it wants you to have that extra 2 mana to pay to draw cards when possible.
I mean, you could play like Radical Idea. You could play what is it? It's not a Chemist's Insight. You could play the pseudo flashback cards
In a non-spirit shell, you mean?
Yeah, in a non-spirit shell.
So when I was cynical at the top of this section, I think it was because I don't know if it has what it takes to appear in a spirits deck, but maybe in something else. I can see that.
I will say, I think the biggest knock on this card is not any of the things that you're talking about, but the fact that it does not have flying. And why the biggest problem with it not having flying is not that it doesn't have flying, it's that it's not buffed by Empyrean Eagle.
Mm-hmm.
You follow me? Like,
yeah.
It's only buffed by one of the lords in the deck. And so I think that's a little bit of a sketchiness with it too. All right. So final verdicts on these two. What do you think? I personally think that they are on the bubble of inclusion with spirits. And I think that they're kind of like nice options to have. You know, these cards could have easily cost 3 and been not even under consideration at all to be in the deck. And so by them costing 2, I think that they're in the extended set of spirits playables. I don't know if they're going to get there for sure right now, but I think it's nice to have the options.
So I want to talk about Terror of the Peaks.
Terror of the Peaks.
So,
wow. Stand and delivered.
3 red. Dragon. Flying. Good. Dragon should fly. Spells your opponents cast that target Terror of the Peaks cost an additional 3 life to cast. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. So, it's also a 5/4. So, important notes. 5 mana, no haste, no ETB. These are not great, but the subsequent ETBs are pretty bonkers because you can deal damage equal to any creature's power to any target, or any creature power that you control to any target. So,
pop quiz, what card is that?
What card is what?
Pandemonium is the name of that card. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target.
Dave, you know my favorite thing about these spoiler episodes with you is how much you love flexing on like old cards. You're like, that's we call that a Pandemonium effect.
This was a very, very fun card when I was a kid, though. It's awesome. The only thing to note is that Pandemonium is both players, and this one is only yours. Ooh. So it's another one of those ones that used to be a symmetrical effect that they made non-symmetrical.
So let's say live in one dream, a dream of this deck is, let's say you cast this for 5. Let's say maybe you're in a green-red ramp deck. You have some mana dorks, get this out on turn 4. Turn 5, you're untapping. You get like a Steel Leaf Champion and a Lovestruck Beast down, right? And you're just 10 to the dome, kabloom. But you have to untap. You have to untap with it. Unfortunately, it's also a 5/4. So let's talk about the implications here, right? So I think the card's good. I don't think it's really good. The Punisher effect is life, not mana. Paying 3 life is like whatever. This doesn't have haste, so you hit it with any number of removal spells, like a Grasp of Darkness, like a Heartless Act. You know, it's practically painless because the opponent's only paying 3 life and like a 2 mana spell for your 5 mana card. That's a perfectly fine trade.
Do you think that the line of text on Terror is worse than Thunderbreak Regent, which hits opponents for 3 if it becomes the target of a spell or ability?
Only marginally, I would say, by the way.
Yeah, super marginal.
Now, the thing that Thunderbreak Regent has on this card is that Thunderbreak Regent costs 4.
4 is better than 5.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like kind of an expensive card to set up. You know, it's 5, and you have to have cards that you were either not casting to the battlefield. You had to have maybe some way to draw into those cards and then cast them again. That's certainly feasible. I mean, you have cards like, let's say, the new Vivian, Monster's Advocate, right? Where maybe you are getting to your creatures more quickly, but that's double red, and I believe Vivian's double green, so your mana better be good. And in red-green and Pioneer, at least, we know it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super buying this card. I think it's really cool. I feel like it says a lot about Magic design right now that this card is on the bubble in some ways, and that it needs even more keywords to make it be able to keep up. I do wonder if there's a chance that this card works as a tutor target for the Vivian that searches, that wishes, which I don't remember the name of that one. Is that Arcbow?
Yeah, Arcbow gets from your sideboard.
Yeah, that does like the Karn effect. I wonder if there's a deck where you play, this just becomes part of the toolbox where you have like a bunch of monsters, and then this is in the sideboard that you can bring up in an advantageous spot to try to close out a game really fast or something like that.
Yeah, like if you're in a board stall and you get this thing onto the board, you're going to finish the game off quickly. Because even if you're not able to attack and you're kind of just staring at each other, or there's not really many advantageous attacks on either side of the battlefield, you just keep playing creatures into this. And even if you're not attacking, you're doming them.
Yeah, it lets you get value out of your cards that were doing nothing, essentially, a couple minutes ago.
I mean, I like it. I'm not creative enough to think of like the best deck that's going to be the highest power level with this. I think, again, it's a bubble card. But I think it's cool. I think it's a cool design. I think originally, like my understanding based on some early like leak stuff was that this was like it counted itself on the ETB, which is a whole lot better.
Oh yeah, because you get a card of value out of that for sure.
Yeah, and it's like a ravenous chupacabra that flies. I think it's just interesting. It's an interesting card. It's interesting design.
You know, I've been casting a lot of 5 CMC dragons in Modern lately, and like so in Ponza we play Glorybringer. This doesn't even look...
It's a we now.
Yeah, you know, we in the Ponza community.
Meeting at
the
Jimmy's
Ponza
Grotto.
pals.
Yeah, meeting at Jimmy's Grotto.
Yeah, it's like a deep fried calzone. Like, I don't think you would run this over Glorybringer just because that haste and the exertability is so good. Though, yeah. I will say, like, man, does this make me miss Obosh? Because if you cast this before Obosh, it's like... And then you cast Obosh afterwards. I think that might just be game over because this nugs them for 10.
That's funny.
Or is it 8?
8 from Obosh, yeah.
Still a lot. And then you can attack with this because, like, it no longer has Summoning Sickness since you cast it the turn before Obosh.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe in a show like that, it can maybe even sniff Modern play, maybe.
Dragons without haste are tough, guys. You know, like, that makes them so much better. Okay, where are we going next? Stan, I think it's your turn.
Yeah, what do you like, Stan?
Well, I don't actually know if I like this card yet. I want to hear what you guys think, but it's a blue card, so I think it's my responsibility to bring it up. And it's the more cryptic command. Crypticer Commander. Sublime Epiphany for UU for an instant. Choose 1 or more. So you could choose 5 if you're nasty. Counter target spell and or counter target activated or triggered ability and or return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand and or create a token that's a copy of target creature you control and or target player draws a card.
This costs 4 blue.
What? No. Before we get into Shane's downerdom, can you paint me an audio picture of the situation that you're in where you get to leverage all 5 of these things at once?
Sure. So
tell me a story.
Yeah, so it's turn 6. You've got like either Snapcaster Mage on the battlefield.
Snapcaster is what I got on the battlefield.
Not helpful, Shane.
Maybe you have a token from Elspeth Conquers Death, a human token, I don't know. Your opponent is casting a spell, then they try to crack a land in response to you, trying to bait.
I knew it was going to be a land. I knew it was going to... You're like, I'm going to get somebody's fetch land with this thing.
Also, your opponent has an ensnaring bridge out, and you need to get an extra card in their hand so you can get under that bridge.
Well, the bridge won't be there anymore.
But you don't want to bounce the bridge because you don't want them to attack with their 3/3 Gruul Spellbreaker.
Okay.
Yeah. I like
More,
it.
better.
I don't think you're gonna get 5 modes a lot, but we will
copying Terror of the Peaks.
We will get an MTGO screenshot when someone pulls this off.
Oh, this is so meme worthy. Yeah.
5 modes.
Didn't Maro say there's like 31 combinations that you can actually accomplish with this card? Something
it's 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1, correct?
Sure.
I could be wrong.
I don't remember how factorials work. I don't think that's quite enough, but
That's 15, by the way.
It's not 31. So, okay, hold on. So you guys go with this. What do you guys think about this?
So 6 mana is not crazy, and I'll say why. Because decks that play Cryptic Command are set up to snap Cryptic Command.
yeah.
Sure.
And like I think that's a very real like line of play in snap Cryptic Command decks. Now, until turn 6, this card is just like either Force of Negation fodder or nothing.
Yeah.
Which is like fair, right?
Yeah.
And then you get to turn 8 and snap this back.
Right. And that's when you're getting all 5 modes because you're copying.
Oh no, you exile Force of Negation cards, so you can't do that.
Unless you cast this on 6 and then snap it back on 8. I actually think this is not really gonna see a lot of play. I kind of bring this card up because I think it's interesting to talk about, but I don't have a lot of faith in it. I don't think it's better than Cryptic. I don't even think it's better than Archmage's Charm.
Oh, yeah. No way. And this card, I think this is a card that we're talking about. I heard a phrase the kids use sometimes. It's called fan service. Stan has to talk about this card for the fans. I have to go sweet for the fans, and Shane has to go, this is way too... Can I come in here with some reality? And that's also for the fans. I don't think this card gets there either, unless for some reason you want to put 1 in a deck as an extra-ish Cryptic.
This card is like the late great Stan Lee making a cameo in every Marvel Cinematic Universe movie ever.
This is like when Tim Allen on Home Improvement brings like the giant Binford tool in, and then Al is like, I don't think so, Tim. And Tim Allen's like, huh? I want to play Sublime Epiphany.
Yeah, it's just use more power. That's it.
Listen, nothing will make me happier than casting this card, but my guess is this is like Commander/Cube material.
Yeah, this looks like a heck of a Commander card, honestly. And I don't play Commander, but seems like everybody's going to want one of these around.
All right, so that was fun. We talked about a silly counterspell. Dave, do you have any non-instant speed cards to talk about?
There's so many blue cards on this list, y'all.
I was noticing this last night that there are so many cards I want to talk about, and they're all blue.
Weird.
And some of them go in my favorite deck, maybe. Can we talk about that?
Please.
I would love to hear.
I'd love to learn what your favorite deck is.
I have 2. My favorite deck right now, I have 2 cards I want to talk about as far as my quote-unquote favorite deck goes.
Back to the 2-ofs.
Unreal, David. Unreal.
They go in the same thing. So the first card I want to talk about is Heartfire Immolator, which is not a blue card. It's a red card. It costs a generic and a red for a 2/2. It is a human wizard. It is a 2-drop that has prowess, and it has a sacrifice ability that says red, sacrifice Heartfire Immolator. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So I will fully admit that I glossed over this card until I saw Ryan Overturf tweeting about it. And his tweet basically said, ignore the cost reducer cards at rare. They're not good enough, but Heartfire Immolator has a chance to be a real one. Made me stop and think for a minute. And I think that, I think it's subtle, but, Prowess is in flux because of the recent change to the companion rules. It was an incredible deck during that last little cycle with Luris. And when you look at Prowess, the lists that are doing well now, everything is coming back. Kiln Fiend, Steamkin, Abbot of Carol Keep is in some decks. Bedrev is back. All the old cards are back. And I think we're back to that state where we're trying to figure out what's the right way to build this shell around 2 super powerful 1-drops, Monastery Swift Spear and Soulscar Mage, which are really the core of the deck along with Manamorphose. So, like Ryan mentioned on our bonus app about Prowess a couple of months ago, the 2-drops in Prowess have basically always been bad. Kiln Fiend is powerful, but super vulnerable. Steamkin, it feels a lot like you're kind of running on a hamster wheel when you're playing with that card. And then Abbot of Carol Keep is just a card I really would like to be able to never have to play again, because it feels so bad to never get that card off of Carol Keep. I feel like I never get the card. I never get a chance to do anything with it. I think that what this card is access to a reasonable body that ups your curve a little bit, that lets you put pressure on a planeswalker if you need to out of the deck without having to use your lightning bolts, and occasionally kill a really big creature, which this deck also struggles with quite mightily sometimes.
It's just like a good floor, right? Like this is just a solid unit to play. There's a good floor. Like the cards you mentioned, like Abbot of Carol Keep, potentially bad floor. You have something like Runaway Steamkin, high ceiling, really low floor. So this is just something that's consistent, probably, with potential upside.
I think if you look at the deck list and go, man, what do I want for my 12 creatures in this deck if I'm playing the really aggressive mono red version of this deck? You know, your 9th through 12 creatures, where you kind of like bridge from your early plays to Bedlam Reveler. It's nice to have a card that has some utility to it. I'm theorizing here, and I'm repeating Ryan Overturf's theorizing here.
I just keep imagining this card if it just said any target, and would be one of the best red cards ever printed.
Yeah,
because it just like, just prowess up a few times, Manamorphose, crash through, dome you.
If this could dome, I would probably pre-order it. But because it only has creatures or walkers, I think it needs to prove itself. Because after playing Prowess, that deck with only, 8 to 12 creatures or so vulnerable to removal that for that cash-in ability to be good, you kind of have to have at least one other creature on the board still. And I think that deck has had other tools potentially to like sack creatures and like dome people. Like it can play Fling for all I care. I think if this makes the cut, it might be sideboard tech. Maybe like you take out your Bedlam Revelers if you see Graveyard Hate or opponent has like big beefers or planeswalkers that you struggle to kill. And like, then I can see this being really good in that zone. But the fact that you have to sacrifice it, I think is kind of a liability that we're understating right now.
I think that's true. I think I'm going to go back and listen to our bonus app about Prowess a little bit, because the one thing I'm thinking about here is that, the mono red deck, people tend to want to play as only going fast. And I think that after interviewing Ryan about the deck, even as someone who played it for a long time, I came to realize that there is some game plans with that deck where you want to play it for the long game. And I think that this helps you pivot between a fast plan and a long plan.
It does not suck with Luris.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
We'll have to see if Luris stays around. I haven't noticed any of the Prowess decks in Modern doing it. Still Lurising still. Maybe it's some incentive to bring it back.
And this is not a bash necessarily on WotC, but so many of the cards in this set, imagine them with Luris, and you're just like, what in the universe?
Yeah.
The fact that Immolator is a wizard, I think is kind of cool, because now you have more ways to activate Wizard's Lightning.
Yep.
And as long as we're theory crafting, what if you just throw Boros Reckoners in your deck and then you sack Immolator to hit Reckoner and then redirect that damage to opponent's face?
I love it. I think this is an interesting thing that I was thinking about for Pioneer for sure.
Reckoner, really? The Reckoner combo?
No, Wizard's Lightning, not the real breakthrough stuff that you came up with. Just the Wizard's Lightning. I was like, this could be a good way to make that an include in the mono red, a more comfortable include in a prowessy version of that deck now. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we spent a lot of time on that card. I want to talk for a minute about my other prowess friend. Is that okay?
Yeah, because I want to talk about this one too.
Okay, so like I said, Stan wanted to know what my favorite deck is. I think really my favorite deck right now is Prowess. I have the most fun playing it when I have a chance to. I think it has different ways to build. I think it's like the spiritual child of Phoenix in some ways, which was a deck that I enjoyed a lot, of course. The card I want to talk about is, of course, one of the cards that Ryan Overturf said to ignore in the tweet I referred to earlier, and that card is Stormwing Entity, which costs 3 generic blue. It is an elemental. This spell costs 2 to less to cast if you cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn. Flying, Prowess. When Stormwing Entity enters the battlefield, scry 2, and it is a 3/3. So I think this card is awesome-ish.
Right. I had to read it like 3 times before it clicked that if you cast a spell, this is a 2-drop.
Yes.
I think that's the headline.
Yes.
This is a 2-mana 3/3 flyer with prowess. When it enters, it scries 2. You have to do a little bit of work, but I think doing that work in Modern especially is going to be really easy.
Yeah. What I thought about when I read this card was, hi, we took away your broken bird. How about this bird instead?
It's a backup bird.
It's a backup bird because it still pairs with the cards that made Arclight Phoenix good. Gutshot, Manamorphose, Lava Dart are all things in Modern that make me think you can make this go. And those are all things that let you cast this on turn 2.
Mm-hmm. And if you have your turn 1 prowess creature, turn 2 Manamorphose, cast this, at least you get like a prowess trigger and a body for that first creature.
Yeah. Now it does die to Bolt. Of course, it dies to Path. Doesn't die to Fatal Push. But that Scry 2 on Enter the Battlefield is a nice fallback for when you play this card into removal. You get a little bit out of it still.
Yeah, I mean, Scry 2 is like draw 0.8 cards?
Pretty much. You have a decent shot of knowing you're going to draw action next turn.
What's a worse top deck? This or Chandra's Incinerator, which we talked about last week, that 6 mana, 6/6 trampler that gets cheaper for every amount of non-combat damage you dealt to opponent.
I think Chandra's Incinerator is far, far worse than this card.
Yeah, because of the decks it goes in.
Yeah, I don't even know if this one is necessarily going to make the cut, but I think this is a card with a lot more potential than the Immolator.
Okay. Stay with me here. Blue prowess. You'd probably put this in like some kind of Izzet prowess deck, right? So like this is competing with Stormchaser Mage and maybe like the Sprite Dragon. 2 cards that have haste.
Yeah.
And prowess, like, it wants to go fast. It wants to be aggressive. I worry that not having haste on here is actually a setback for the decks that this wants to be in. And whether or not it's playable will kind of come down to, like, whether the Scry 2 is good enough and consistent enough to overcome the lack of speed on this creature.
Yeah, and I don't even know if I think that this is like a 4 of. You know what I mean? I feel like this is a good card that maybe you run as a 2 of, where sometimes you get to cast it early. Other times, you set yourself up to just play it late because it's a bit of a stall breaker, kind of like the dragon we were just talking about, where because it has flying, it can fly over a complicated board, deal some damage, deal the last points. You can protect it a little bit and kind of go from there.
Shane, would you ever cast this card?
Sure. I think that it seems pretty good, right? Like 1 in the blue for a 3/3 flying prowess is great, but like you said, it has no haste. So our closest comparison is probably something like Stormchaser Mage. But that's a 1/3, which certainly sucks on the stat line compared to Stormwing Entity here.
I will say, when I've been playing those blue-red prowess decks, man, I have hated Stormchaser Mage. Hated it. I know Stan's looking at me with a shocked face.
It's better than ever.
I mean, isn't Sprite Dragon just better than both of these cards? Probably.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
I agree with that.
So this is like, where do you go with cards? Again, with the cards that are beyond creatures 1 through 12. Because if you're playing blue-red prowess, it's Soul Scar, Swift Spear, Sprite Dragon, and then where do you go after that? Could be this, could be Stormchaser.
Manamorphose, Gutshot, Mutagenic Growth, swing for 16?
Yep. Perfect.
Yeah, it has a shot. It has an outside shot. It's a cool card. I have a really hard time with cost reduction cards like this because you pretty much have to compare them to cards that stand on their own without having to be set up, right? And so it's always hard to say, is this card worth setting up? And I think in this case, Stan pointed out a really good point, which is it doesn't have haste. So is this in an aggressive Izzet deck, or is it in a longer, grindier base deck that just kind of wants this as some kind of burst finisher? I don't know what that would be, or it's sort of just like sandbagging cantrips or something like that, and you just burst finish them.
It's also prowess. That deck is also prowess. It's just the other face of prowess, I think.
Sure. Makes sense.
I will say, whether or not either of these cards that Dave brought up see play, I'm thrilled that WotC reversed course on their decision to stop printing prowess cards, which was something that they kind of suggested that they were like basically saying that they're not interested in doing prowess anymore. And now we have 2 or 3 new prowess cards in the set. I'm just thrilled to see that ability. It's one of my favorite abilities on a creature. So thank you.
They even brought back Jeskai Elder.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, I definitely didn't think we would see Prowess come back, and I'm stoked that there's 1/2 drop that seems like it might have a chance at getting there. Of course, no shot we would see a another 1-drop with Prowess, but
yeah,
we'll see.
I want to talk about a card that has 2 colors that we have not talked about this week. Conclave Mentor. Green and a white. This is like our signpost uncommon for limited. It's a Centaur Cleric creature for a 2/2. If one or more +1/+1 counters will be put on a creature you control, that many +1/+1/+1 counters are put on that creature instead. Sounds familiar. There's some additional text here. When Conclave Mentor dies, you gain life equal to its power. So we have a green and a white Winding Constrictor effect. It's a 2/2, not a 2/3. So yeah, it makes a Hardened Scales type deck have the redundancy it needs to not be built around green-black. And green-black is certainly a strong color combination in Pioneer right now, due to the mana and spells like Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, removal options like Abrupt Decay are still super strong and important to have access to. But this kind of opens up an option for a leaner and more consistent like Heliod Scales deck, I think. Like it's probably a consistent Heliod Ballista enabler. I can see a deck that's built around Hardened Scales, built around Conclave Mentor, and you have your 8 Scales effects and a bunch of creatures that take advantage of counters. Like we have all the artifacts are still totally usable in this. We have Heliod, and we have some there's plenty of white cards that put tokens on things and put counters on things rather. So why not?
I love it. This and Basri Cat, sign me up.
Yeah, why not?
I mean, I think that this card is. I mean, don't you think there's a chance that it just goes into like an Abzan kind of constrictor build? Potentially for sure. I mean, you have Triome.
I mean, there's Triome. I mean, white black already has good mana, so you've got white black, you've got green black.
Green black has good mana too.
Yeah, so you have access to that mana. I am curious if here's what I think will happen. I think people will stretch into Abzan and then maybe just realize it's better to have it be green-white and go from there. The green-white mana is not amazing. I think back to like that Monastery Mentor green-white deck that we were tinkering with like in our like solo brew episode, and it certainly wasn't great. So that's an issue. So who knows? It might be, maybe it's just like a splash, like I'm splashing this for Heliod and for Conclave Mentor, but you really want to have this down early. But if you have Winding Constrictor, it's not like, you're not relying on this on 2. You have your Hardened Scales, you have your Winding Constrictor, you have this as an additional piece of Scales tech. Having both of them down would be awesome. So like when you have a Scales down and a Winding Constrictor down, that's great. If you have Conclave Mentor down and Winding Constrictor down, sure, why not? Seems good.
Yeah. This card seems like a totally playable, gonna be in some good deck, enable a couple of different things. It does seem like an excellent Heliod enabler after the couple of rounds I've played with that deck for our dive down that we did. Always looking for extra ways to sneak an extra counter onto your ballista. And this seems like a good one.
Yeah. It's honestly not too much to talk about. It's just going to be, we know this type of effect, how it works. It's just going to be do existing decks try to slot it in? Do new decks get created around it? We'll see. I think it's a easy, cool card to call out.
This is a card that's hard for me to assess. I'm buying what you're selling though. And like having played a little bit of Heliod and seeing how powerful like ways to make +1/+1 counters easier to accrue, I think this has the stuff to, not feel embarrassed testing it, which is always my bare minimum, of course.
Will I be embarrassed?
Can I steal a trick from Dave's repertoire and throw 2 cards that are, in my opinion, related?
Man, you guys are breaking all the rules.
All right, we got a couple of elves in this set, and I kind of want to talk about them together just because the reasons I find them interesting are related. So the first one is Llanowar Visionary. 2 and a green for an elf druid. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. It also taps to add green, and it is a 2/2. My co-hosts, not impressed with this card.
I mean, the card's fine. It's just like the most boring design. It's just like some of the most straightforward, on the nose card design I can think of.
I mean, it's kind of like that elf that makes 3 mana, that costs 3 mana, and it was a 3/3.
Llanowar tribe.
Yeah.
So here's the thing about Visionary. And you know what? How about I just throw out that other card and we can talk about them together. The other one is Fierce Empath. This is a reprint, but it's being introduced to both Modern and Pioneer. 2 and a green for an elf. When an Empath enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a creature with CMC 6 or greater. Reveal that creature, put it in your hand, shuffle your library. Empath is a 1/1. Initial reactions to that card?
Powerful. Harbinger for big cards, kind of.
I mean, we'll see. It's like it's one of the cards that I've looked at this card. I've looked at all the cards in the set multiple times, right? And it has never stuck out to me. So clearly, I'm either not hot on it or I'm overlooking something. Probably the latter.
Well, okay. So here's why both of them jumped out to me. 3 CMC is actually really important for Elves decks because your line of play is often turn 1 Mana Dork, turn 2 a really important 3 CMC card. Whether it's Azuri, maybe it's Elvish Archdruid. You know, in some cases you might play like Steel Leaf Champion. But at that 3 CMC spot, you kind of want to do something that either produces mana if it's Archdruid or makes your board stronger if it's Azuri or Steel Leaf. Okay? And the thing that I like about the first one that draws you a card and adds mana is that it replaces itself, which is an effect that's like kind of rare in Elves. You sort of have to play Visionary, which is a weak card. That's the 1 and a green when it enters, it draws a card. Mm-hmm. But it also helps your mana engine. So it's kind of doing like a very, very bad impression of Elvish Archdruid for that mana cost by only giving you 1 extra mana, but it is still replacing itself, which like in a critical mass deck like Elves is, being able to get to your deck to find more bodies to barf out on turn 3 or 4, I think is like a really good effect for a very linear strategy. Mm-hmm. Empath, on the other hand, has a lot of really powerful 6 CMC and above cards to find in Modern. You know, Craterhoof Behemoth is the obvious one that actually sees play in Modern Elves sometimes. And like, it's not unusual to be able to generate the mana you need on turn 3 or 4 to get that 6 CMC spell out.
Yep.
And like the Elves decks, they've kind of been struggling a little bit ever since Wrenn and 6 and Plague Engineer came out, and having these new tools that like either give them a big game in the form of Empath, finding like this big beefer, or potentially like some long game in the form of this, you know, cantripping elf. Like, I think it's interesting to test around with this deck that has been struggling lately.
I also think that one thing that's interesting is the other alternative to Craterhoof Behemoth is Decimator of the Provinces, which is sort of like a reprint of Craterhoof Behemoth in some ways from, it's from, what was it called? Eldritch Moon. And the reason I bring up Decimator is that it has Emerge. And so if you have a board with a couple of Elvish Visionaries on it, for example, or not Elvish Visionaries, Llanowar Visionaries, which have that extra CMC, you can sacrifice them to the Emerge cost to kind of ramp this thing out super fast after you get in a situation where you get it. You know, so it's possible. I imagine there is some kind of line that's possible without too much work. That's Fierce Empath, go get your Decimator, drop it, emerge it, attack with it kind of early in the game.
That's a cool brainstorm.
That is a cool brainstorm. I'll read Decimator. I had to look it up. It's a 10 mana 7/7 trample haste with Emerge 6 green. When you cast Decimator, creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain trample. So it's an Anthem effect that also makes a big hit. And it checks itself. So when you cast Decimator, I guess it swings for 9 on that first turn.
Yeah. So you can just barf out all those creatures you were talking about. You know, the tokens don't help you with the Emerge cost, but everything else does. And you just kind of go from there.
Yeah. So I guess the reason I bring them up is because 3 CMC is important for the Elves decks, and it's cool that there's some new tech.
I think it's legit. These are both good cards. The Visionary I wasn't seeing, but definitely Empath. But I think it makes sense what you said. Shane,
there's so many blue cards left.
Shane, why don't you go again?
There's so many blue cards. Okay, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite blue cards on this list of like 8 blue cards. Okay,
you can pick something else if you want.
No, I want to talk about this because it's interesting.
Okay.
Lofty Denial. 1 in the blue, instant, counter target spell unless it's a controller pays 1. So you got your little force spike there. But if you control a creature with flying, counter that spell unless its controller pays 4 instead. So yeah, this is a conditional counter spell that will work in Flyers decks, obviously. And it's a nice big tax of 4 mana. So it's kind of like a better mana leak that relies on you having a creature with flying. In Pioneer, we do not have access to mana leak. So what the best thing we have is like a quench, for instance, correct?
I think you're thinking of Mystical Dispute.
Oh yeah, well, Mystical Dispute's very good, yes. But in terms of a general counter spell that doesn't only counter blue spells, like this is a little bit better on rate if you have a flyer. But there's a lot of drawbacks here, yeah?
Well, not if you put it in the right deck.
I mean, sure. But Dave, you had some thoughts on this that I agree with, and I think that you're going to be better at explaining them than me.
Okay.
Because you cast a lot more counter spells than I do.
Yeah, I was going to say, Shane.
How many have you cast, Dave? If you're such a good control mage, name every spell you've ever countered.
Oh, so many. A lot of Swords of Plowshares.
Abrupt Decay, Supreme Verdict.
Yeah. I figured it out. That's from my Spell Queller days.
6 mana Chandra.
Look, I love this design space. I think that doing these kind of like sort of tribal-esque or restriction-heavy powerful cards that have fallback options is a good thing for Magic in general, but I think specifically it's a good thing for Pioneer because Pioneer is kind of emerging to be this format. I've talked about it a bunch of times where cards that have drawbacks right now are good enough to have decks be built around them, right? And so I'm thinking about cards like the card that I go back to all the time is the one from that was in Feather for a while that does 2 damage to one of your creatures and 4 damage to one of their creatures for Reckless Rage.
Yeah.
Is the card. Like that kind of vibe I think is interesting, and to see it come out in a counterspell I think is really good as well. So I think that this is something that can help push novel decks apart from each other because they get a good bonus for hewing to certain kind of like deck building constraints. But I think that this particular card has some problems as usual going toe to toe with Mystical Dispute, and also Censor actually is a pretty big overlap with this card as well. Because one goes down to 1 CMC and the other one draws you a card as a fallback. And I think that the space in between those two things is kind of tough. I think that this has no shot in Modern, right? You're playing Mana Leak over this card 10 out of 10 times. It's not even close because it's always a 3. The upside is not really worth it. But I think that, it's better than Mana Leak when you have a flyer. I do think I'm not sure what the rules are when this is on the stack and somebody kills your only flyer. Like what happens then? Does this revert to being a force spike? I think it does revert to being a force spike, which is kind of a drag. But, I really, really want to like this card, but I don't think it's good enough to get there ultimately, mostly because Bant Spirit specifically already has so many good options to play with. I just don't think this is going to make the cut for Pioneer. But Stan, what do you think?
Well, I often complain that Pioneer does not have good counter spells. And Mana Leak is a great card. Like, it's a card that has repeatedly impressed me in Modern. And if you can make this a better Mana Leak, I think this has Pioneer chops. I agree with your point that, like, Spirits is a pretty tuned deck, and the threshold for getting interactive cards in that deck is pretty high. Maybe this doesn't go in Spirits. Maybe this goes into whatever deck you're putting that like blue 2 mana Prowess Bird into and playing like a slower mid-range blue-red control strategy with like Sprite Dragons and Stormchaser Mages.
Sure.
So seeing new counterspells that do impressions of older, better counterspells I think is interesting for me just because like Pioneer needs more interaction, and I'm willing to give this some benefit of the doubt.
Here's my issue kind of fundamentally is I think this is a card without a deck. And I think Stan, like you kind of mentioned, like let's say we had some controlling long game flying prowess deck, but you don't have enough creatures to turn this on enough, right? Like you don't have enough of a collective mass of flyers to make this really good. In spirits, you don't really want to be holding up 2 mana necessarily. I mean, there are lots of options with flash. I mean, now that I'm saying that, it's like, well, what if I have one of my flash lords down, or I am holding a creature with flash and they don't cast something into my lofty denial, and then at end of turn I just flash in my creature. That's certainly an option there. But I think that when you're playing to the board, you want something like Mystical Dispute, like Dave mentioned, just because the mana tempo advantage is so strong there versus like holding up a mana leak, which is not necessarily a strong spell for an aggressive creature deck. That's something that you'd want to play in more of a controlling deck. So I don't know if this just doesn't check enough boxes for enough decks to really have a home, but 4 mana is a really big tax. I wouldn't be surprised to see people at least testing this out, and maybe it sticks, maybe it doesn't.
Can we talk about another counterspell really quick?
Oh, I love them. Love them.
All right, Miscast. Costs a single blue. It's an instant, counter target instant or sorcery spell unless its controller pays 3. So it's another cheap mana leak effect.
Yeah, it's just like the card we talked about.
Pretty much. Very close, right? I think the trick with this card looks super powerful at first glance, but I think when you look a little bit closer, I don't think it's going to get there. Okay, so if you look at this compared to Dispel, which is a hard counter for an instant, this looks pretty good because this also gets sorceries. But I think the truth is this card is just worse than Spell Pierce in almost all applications because it cannot get other non-creature spells like Planeswalkers, which is huge.
Or Fires of Invention.
Right, in enchantments. Or, I've gotten engineered explosives with Spell Pierce before, and like weird things like that you really do not want to have come on the board.
Yeah, the advantage of Spell Pierce is always about the either making your opponent play off curve or blowing them out when they try to stick something on curve, right? Like, so thinking back to when I was playing Infect in Modern, when your opponent is trying to slam down that Liliana on 3 and you blow them out with the Spell Pierce, that's just like, oh, sweet, like I just won the game. Or if they have to hold it up and not cast it on 3, you're also winning because you're having the tempo advantage. And you don't really get that advantage with this because you're not, like you said, you're not able to take them off of anything besides instant or sorceries.
Yeah, and the truth is, wanting to mana leak a sorcery will come up so much less than you think it will. There are not that many sorceries that people play, really.
This is worse than Dive Down.
Wow, this guy with a take.
I think you're using the spell in limited to protect your creatures from removal spells.
Yeah.
And I think that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like this is anti-counter. This will end up being sideboard anti-counter material once Mystical Dispute is out of standard. Like, that's what I think this card is.
So I'm interested in hearing your guys' response to this because I'm not the control mage here, right? But I feel like you only have so many slots in your sideboard, and maybe
15 total.
Maybe your main deck for something like this, right? Like your conditional counter spells. And I feel like you either need to be painting with the broadest brush or the most powerful one. So like in terms of, let's say, isolated power, you have Mystical Dispute, or that's super efficient anti-blue. Or broad brush, you might have any number of random counter spells. That's like from a Censor to this. I can't even think of a counter spell. This is how bad I am at playing counter Magic.
It's Spell Pierce is the card that you're thinking about.
Sure. So that's why I don't know like how you make room for a card like this, where it's like, what are you counter teching against? Like, what are you planning to face down? Where it's like, yeah, I really need my Miscast in the sideboard.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's a splashy 1-mana spell that I don't think will get there. I'll be happy to play it if it does, but I don't think it will.
Maybe in Pioneer you can use this against Lotus Breach
To
take care of one of their cards that untaps lands. I don't know.
Oh, good point. Yeah, maybe.
Is this even better than that Theros 1-mana counterspell that turns like a spell into a 2/2 bird?
Swan Song?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I mean, Swan Song has really specific applications, but I don't think this gets there either.
Right. That's my point. Like,
Yeah.
this is just worse than like so many other 1 mana counter spells that
Got it.
not interested.
Onward.
Heave. Shane, you wanna give us another one that we can respond to?
Let's go back to non-blue cards. I'm not hot on this, but I think that certain mages are. It's Liliana, Waker of the Dead. 2 generic black, Planeswalker loyalty 4. So her +1 reads, each player discards a card. Each opponent who can't loses 3 life. -3, target creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard. Her -7 reads, you get an emblem with at the beginning of combat on your turn, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It gains haste. Not a bad ultimate.
Yeah.
Get there pretty quickly. So it's easy to compare this, I think, to the 3 mana Liliana, where the +1 is a discard, simultaneous discard. The -3 is some kind of targeted removal, or in the fact of Liliana of the Veil, it's just an edict effect. And the ultimate does cool stuff. I think that it's an interesting card to balance around 4 mana, right? Like a 4 mana Planeswalker is an interesting design space at this point, right? Because we have seen so many powerful 3 mana walkers get printed. Like we even have Liliana the Last Hope in Pioneer right now. We've seen plenty of interesting role players and powerful cards like Teferi 3, like the 3 mana Nissa that makes creatures and gives counters. There's all sorts of 3 mana role players. There's extremely powerful 5 mana walkers that can take over a game fairly quickly. But 4 mana is kind of that weird wiggle room. Like, how much can you give me for 4 mana and it better be good? And I think that this one is pretty good. And I think that it's going to slot pretty nicely in like Pioneer Sultide Delirium, because it's a flexible walker where it has that discard effect that you often might even want in your own strategy, where you're putting a card you want into the graveyard and also continuing to probably shred your opponent's hand. If there's a challenging creature on the other side of the battlefield, you're putting cards into your graveyard already, just with the way the deck functions. So you're probably just going to have a straight up Doomblade type effect. The ultimates, if you get there, it's going to be really good because you're going to have plenty of creatures in your graveyard from your like self-building effects and your creatures dying. So why not?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the obvious home for that card. It's like, put it with Kroxa, put it with Uro, build a deck around it, right? Like around one of those 2 branches, basically. I think that is a reasonably powered down facsimile of Liliana of the Veil. And
yeah, it's like fixed for Pioneer LOTV.
Yeah, and Pioneer doesn't really, off the top of my head, have a good like mono black walker that is in this kind of grind category. And so here it is. Reasonable casting cost, reasonable abilities, synergize with the +1, and you will have a deck.
For sure. I think this is the kind of card also that you can get to the ultimate fairly often. It's like, people who play Liliana of the Veil will get to her ultimate fairly often. And with this card, you either have blockers down, you have removal to protect her, and the ultimate's really good. Like I would rather have this ultimate than Liliana of the Veil oftentimes, I imagine, because you're going to get a lot of creatures recurring from the graveyard, and it's going to be really hard for your opponent to stop that.
Yeah. Yeah, you get to put the same one back over and over again if you want. If they kill it, bring it back.
I actually have a lot to say about this card.
Okay.
I want to hear it.
So this is our safe space to kind of dream big about things that are kind of, outrageous and it may never come to fruition, but let's let our imaginations wander, right?
Mm-hmm.
For one, I do like that this makes Liliana's Triumph better, right? Like 1 in a black instant, each opponent sacks a creature. If you control a Lily Planeswalker, each opponent also discards a card. We also have other really good Liliana cards at 3 mana. We mentioned Last Hope, but even like the one from Origins, that's a 2/3 lifelinker, and then when she flips, she pluses to make opponents discard, and she minuses for recursion. I don't know, maybe like we can have some kind of mono black control that's running 2 to 3 different types of Liliana cards. It has a bunch of removal, and then I'll just like grind to finish because either this or Liliana Last Hope have like game-ending, devastating ultimates.
Mm-hmm.
Heck, maybe we can even play a card that only appears in like those dual decks, which is Liliana Scrounger, 2 and a black for a 3/2 at your end step. If you control, if a creature died this turn, you may put a loyalty counter on a Lily Planeswalker you control. So like that coupled with like a bunch of removal spells, I don't know, dare to dream.
Wow.
Throw in Gary, why not?
Liliana Tribal happening right in front of us.
Who said you didn't brew, Stan? Called yourself a filthy net decker last week. This week you're dreaming big.
Yeah, I hope Dan hears this and maybe he'll have me on the pod.
I mean, what's good about this Walker is much like, let's say, another 4-mana Pioneer staple in Chandra. It's like everything it does is fine. Like it's you have to have something in your graveyard for the removal to work, but you're going to in the decks that it's going in. Unfortunately, it means you have to probably be playing a deck that is filling the graveyard. So unlike in Modern, where you're going to have a number of cards in your graveyard right away, Pioneer doesn't have fetch lands, doesn't have a lot of great cheap cantrips. So you're going to have to be playing stuff like Grizzly Salvage or Satyr Wayfinder because you want that graveyard full of stuff. In Sultide Delirium, that's happening anyway. So this is kind of a tailor-made card for Sultide Delirium. So it's almost certainly going to see play. There's Planeswalkers that are definitely on the bubble for that deck that they're going to be fine removing and inserting this card. I think it's just a shoe-in. I like that it doesn't seem busted. It just seems really synergistic, and that's kind of what this deck is. It's just a pile of synergistic good cards, besides Uro, which is bonkers. But broadly, I think that it's going to be a good Pioneer role player.
Can I tell you something? I am a little more at ease with this card being playable immediately than Teferi. And Teferi is supposed to be like the marquee card of the set, so I'm sure it has a home somewhere, but this makes a lot of sense to me. I like what I'm supposed to do with this card.
Yeah.
Which is Mono Black Liliana Tribal.
Sure, or what Shane just said.
Oh, right.
Onward. Stan, what do you want to talk about next?
Colossal Dreadmaw.
No.
Ooh.
Dave, hear me out.
A spicy meatball.
4/6/6 for a dinosaur trample 6/6.
4 green. So 6 mana 6/6. That's on rate.
Yeah, 4 green. Sorry. G's look like 6s to me. I don't know. I think this might be top 5 best cards in the set.
Give it double strike. Get that trample through. I like it.
All right. Can I want to talk about another blue card.
No.
It's contentious. This could be good radio. Frantic Inventory. 1 in a blue, instant draw card, then draw cards equal to the number of cards named Frantic Inventory in your graveyard. And players who've been playing Magic for a long time, maybe people who are familiar with Pauper's metagame, may recognize this as a pseudo reprint of Accumulated Knowledge, which is a very similar effect, except knowledge counts cards named Accumulated Knowledge in both players' graveyards. Whereas Frantic Inventory only rewards you for having frantic inventories in your graveyard. So I personally never played with Knowledge. I do know that it's like kind of a beloved card. When this one was spoiled, people did rejoice.
For sure. I mean, big like feelings, nostalgia feelings popping out, which is something they're very good at in Magic design these days.
I guess my personal assessment here is that like the delta between this and Accumulated Knowledge is pretty narrow, right? You kind of have to be lucky for your opponent to like have the knowledges in their deck if you're playing that in Pauper or whatever. So if this doesn't make the cut here, I just don't think Knowledge ever will make the cut in Modern or Pioneer. And I kind of love this as sort of like testing the waters for whether or not an effect like that is playable in our favorite formats.
Yeah, I just don't think that they're ever going to print. Like, Knowledge is never going to end up in Modern or Pioneer mostly because of the symmetrical design, which is something they just avoid these days if they can, because people forget to count their opponent's graveyards. So I think this card is interesting. I really loved playing Accumulated Knowledge back in the day, but the secret about Accumulated Knowledge is that it's really just okay until you play the third one. right? So if you are getting cards in your graveyard or cantripping a lot and doing some kind of thing where you have a lot of kind of like spells going on and you're just kind of like cantripping, this is fine because it grows, or could be fine because it grows, but you got to get to that third one, because otherwise you end up just playing a 2-mana divination with paying off kind of big to get a 2-mana divination. And that's not really a great payoff when it really comes down to it. I mean, over the weekend, for example, I was playing a bunch of one mind decks in Modern, trying to catch up with some of the stuff that I was really high on from Ikoria. And like even a 1-mana divination, if it costs you too much in setup, is not really that great of a payoff in that format. So, when I think about it, since it's an instant, since the CMC is reasonable, I start to wonder if there's a chance that this is going to end up in some kind of like Pioneer, is it Phoenix kind of build, because it draws you cards and it gives you a spell trigger and it's an instant, so you can have some flexibility with it.
And potentially it's okay to discard with like your Is It Charm effects in Phoenix.
Yeah, exactly. You get a payoff from Is It Charm and all that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of space that I feel like this could work. It's like a blue-red spells card that has a little bit of graveyard payoff, but it's not busted until you pay 2 for 3 cards.
That makes sense. It's just one of those cards like I felt like I'd seen 3 versions of. Like, Take Inventory was a sorcery speed, I think, in Eldritch Moon at the same mana cost.
Yeah.
And I didn't to just like not realize that this kind of effect has never been legal in Modern. And of course, Pioneer. It seems like, do you think that this has some kind of home in like a Turbo Xeroxy blue-based deck, Dave? Or do you just think it's like the floor is too low? Like you have to work to make it decent.
I mean, if you think Phoenix is a Turbo Xerox deck in Pioneer, then maybe. I mean, but this card has to compete with Treasure Cruise in that deck. You know what I mean? Which is like, I don't know if there's room for them to live together, if there's enough space in the shell. So I feel like this card, I don't see the immediate home for it in either format. But thanks for the nostalgia, Wizards. Stan, what do you think?
I'm a wait and see person. It takes a lot of work. I feel like I would almost rather try testing See the Truth.
Yeah. Which is a card I really want to talk about, but you know what? Not going to talk about it.
What? I thought we talked about it last week, but we didn't.
We did not. Stan, do you want to talk about See the Truth quickly, or?
1 and a blue for a sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put one of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. If this spell was cast from anywhere other than your hand, put each of those cards into your hand instead. So it's a 2-mana draw 3 is the ceiling, or a 2-mana anticipate is the floor.
Sorceries beat Anticipate.
Yes.
Which is really bad.
Really, really bad.
Yeah.
I do think that this is like worth testing more than not accumulated knowledge. Just because like in Modern in particular, first, you don't need multiple copies of this card to be good. You just need this and like one other enabler to make this good. And in Modern, we have a lot of those enablers. Snapcaster Mage is the obvious one. 3-mana Chandra, Acolyte of Flame, I think is a cool one. 4-mana Chandra, when she ticks up, puts a card into exile.
Yeah.
Dave, you sort of teased this earlier, but Light of the Stage will make this draw 3. Cascade, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bloodbraid Elf.
Mission Briefing. It's time.
Yeah, Mission Briefing and Bloodbraid Elf are both interesting ones too.
Teamers See the Truth. I like it.
Yeah, I really, really want this card to be good because I think it's interesting, but I just don't know. Guys, the floor is so bad.
The floor sucks.
Yeah. Also with Teferi, Time Raveler ticking up, this does become instant speed. Problem solved.
I mean, that's definitely make your own better than Anticipate, potentially. Make your own Anticipate.
Yeah.
Perfect.
With Teferi 3.
I really thought that Anticipate was going to be good when it came out. Right? It was kind of before I totally had a good, but the mediocre handle that I have on the dynamics of Eternal formats now. And I was like, this is so close to Impulse. It's got to be good. No.
Well, it's no telling time, in my opinion.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. We've got 15 minutes left. So I want to hit some more fringy cards, potential cards. Subira, Tulzidi, Caravanner. 2 in red. Legendary creature, Human Shaman for a 2/3. She has haste. She has 2 abilities. She can pay 1 generic mana. Another target creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn. 1 in a red and tap her and discard your hand. Until end of turn, whenever a creature you control with power 2 or less deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So I don't hate this. I don't hate it. I think what's really interesting is like you sort of immediately think about, well, power 2 or less, that's not that great. You can make like a Goblin Rebel Master or a Legion War Boss unblockable before moving to combat. That certainly doesn't stink. I think that's certainly cool. Like I'm thinking about this as Pioneer power level primarily. So you put this in, a couple of perhaps in your Pioneer red deck. You are making your Rebel Master, your War Boss unblockable. They get a lot of triggers off of the other tokens there. That's really good because that's kind of one of the issues sometimes is you just can't really attack with a Rebel Master because it only has 2 toughness. And so anything that blocks it is just going to kill it. But making it unblockable is certainly a way to fireball your opponent pretty effectively. I don't love the 1 in the red and the tap ability. It might be interesting for some not very popular or as yet unseen like red token type synergies like goblin tokens or something like that. It's rough that she has to tap as well. I think it has potential, but it's not really like your 3-drop slot in your red decks is not pretty packed right now. Like if it's not something that you're like, well, I wish I had more good 3-drops to play. You have your Bone Crusher Giant, you have your Rebel Masters, you might have some Legion War Boss. I don't really know.
I mean, I think this plus the goblins is a great combo that you outlined. So yeah. I have some +1s to add to that for you. Hopefully it doesn't get you over 2 power so you can still be unblockable. But yeah, other than that, it feels a little bit like, on the discard your hand thing, I'd really probably rather just play Bomat Courier than this card anyway, because, cheap, synergy, blah, blah, blah.
I think they're different.
They are very different. I'm kind of like a fake.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but like Bomat takes a little bit of work. This takes a little bit of work, but Bomat just dies to like a light breeze.
Yeah.
And there are times
the
where
beautiful filigrees fall off.
Right. And there are times when you just can't attack with the Bomat because opponent played a 1/2.
Yeah.
They played an Arboreal Glazer or whatever. And like this, if anything, just makes your Bomats better.
Yeah, that's true. You could play it with them and then they can attack.
Shane, I like what you're saying with the goblins. I can also maybe see this as like a tool for a chonky red or even a more lower to the ground prowess style red deck that kind of tops off at this, where you make your creatures unblockable before you start to like storm off with all of your spells.
Yeah, my primary issue is just that it doesn't do enough on its own. Like this is not like a 3-drop you want to put onto an empty board necessarily. I mean, it does have haste, that's cool, but it's not great for the rate. So we'll see.
Part of me, like this is a total long shot, but like maybe this is sideboard tech for Ensoul to make like some of your unblockable creatures, like your Ginger Brute, start netting you cards, makes your Bomat a little better, as I mentioned. Yeah, I don't know. I think it has a lot of utility, so I can see this card being tested a bunch.
There's definitely a ton of text on here for a 3-drop.
And it's got haste.
Yep.
Which some dragons don't even have. What do you guys think about Angelic Ascension? 1 in a white instant. Exile target creature or planeswalker. Its controller creates a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying.
Don't like it.
I gotta say, I'm into this card.
Are you? Man, I don't know.
So here's what I think about it. I think it's going to be really good for dealing with your creatures in like white aggressive shells after your opponent tries to remove them. So something like Boros Heroic or Boros Feather or like black-white Sramos. You're like all those creatures in those decks often die to shock. And this is a way to like get a little extra value, make that creature survive a removal spell, and have like a bigger beater off the top end.
Yeah, I mean, you aren't playing this in SRAM because you're exiling your own creature, and then you're not getting like the death triggers off of like all the enchantment synergies. I hate to poke holes in the concept, but
you got to poke holes sometimes to make a Swiss cheese.
I mean, I think it's interesting that it's kind of like your use went immediately to what Shane was thinking about for that. What's it called? The village rights.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of like, we're going to use it on my own creatures. I just look at this and go, white can kill a planeswalker at instant speed. And that's pretty handy tool, but the trade-off is massive.
Yes.
I mean, Generous Gift barely saw any even fringe testing in Modern. And that's a little bit more expensive, but the drawback is much less. And it also hits any permanent.
Yeah.
Generous Gift does.
Yeah, but clearly this is not Modern power level.
Yeah.
Right? Like most of the cards that we talked about today are not Modern power level.
Yeah. It's a good thing we had a Pioneer focus breakdown, because this kind of feels like almost a Pioneer focused spoiler sode.
Yeah, a little bit. It's turning out that way. But that cost is rough to be like, you got a 4/4 flyer. Yeah. And I'm at 6 life. Well, now I killed this, and now I have to figure out what to do with that.
Totally. I mean, that's why I don't want to target my opponent's creatures or walkers with it and use it defensively.
The first thing I thought about with this, though, was, can I play this in Eldrazi Taxes kind of style decks, because I have Eldrazi Displacer in my deck already, and so I can just blink the token. So I'll kill your planeswalker, blink the token. But if I'm playing most Taxes builds like that, I have access to black as well. And it's kind of like, maybe I'm just playing, some of black's planeswalker removal instead of worrying about this card, All
right. So there you have it. Those were a lot of cards that we felt like talking about today. There are more cards that we could talk about, but sometimes we run out of time. We do have a little bit of a wind down planned for this episode, so we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we're going to share some called shots about Core 21 and just reflect on the set in general based on the cards that we have seen thus far. So stay with us. Last week, I was biking to Dave's house. I was wearing a helmet, so I couldn't listen to music. We hung out in Dave's backyard. It was nice.
Did you know about this, Shane? Did we ever tell you that we saw each other?
I think so. I'm jealous.
Sorry.
I didn't mean to make you jealous. The listeners, though, they can have envy. Yeah, so, because I'm wearing a helmet, I can't listen to music. I was just talking to myself and thinking about today's episode, and I had this idea, try something new out, which is see if we can maybe make some bold claims and predictions on what we think is the best card in Core 21. And the way I framed this question for my co-host is, what do you think is the Uro of this set?
I think instead of Uros, I think we have a lot more interesting potential role players. And I think I'll talk about that when we talk about our overall feelings on the set. Here's what's crazy. I think the best card in the set is Village Rights. It's just such low opportunity cost, such low mana cost to have in the main deck of your synergistic decks. And then it has sideboard potential against removal heavy decks, against sweeper decks. There's a whole bunch of interactions from just like hitting Uro or Kroxa with their sack triggers on the stack to mono black aggro, having card advantage engines to like the Rally and Aristocrat style decks we know. It blanks adventure cards that are really popular in Pioneer. It can fizzle every one of them for value. I'm just comparing it mentally to sort of like what Arkham's Astrolabe was compared to Prophetic Prism. You take 1 mana off it, and you have a staple. I don't think it's quite that, but I think this could be like Veil of Summer adjacent in terms of like annoyance and presence.
Whoa.
We'll see.
Big words.
I know. I mean, then again, like I also want to balance my excitement because like it's hyper efficient. That doesn't mean that it's like doing something to progress your game plan. And is it like worth a card? It's like, remember like Claim to Fame? Remember when LSV, like one of the best players ever, believed that it was going to break Death Shadow and make it be ban worthy, and it ended up almost nowhere. Claim to Fame.
You got played occasionally in Shadow, very occasionally.
Yeah.
Stan, what's your thought? Best card in the set.
It's hard. I actually think there's a handful of contenders. I think long term, it might just be Goblin Snoop, because it seems to me like it may have the highest ceiling of any card in this set.
Stan, can I tell you something? Just flipping through cards right now, I think that is my pick as well for the quote unquote best card.
Just in terms of like raw potential or synergistic potential.
Yeah, and just that, like, it could enable crazy fast kills. It could just be played for value. Really easy to cast for a lot of decks. Immediately has a home. I just think like all of those are really strong positive factors that kind of speak to this card's potential. And like I said earlier, I kind of think we've only seen the tip of the iceberg, and this card could be broken in maybe even like non-goblin synergies. Oh no, it has to be a goblin just because you only get the effect if it's a goblin. But I don't know. I could just see this card just being like hella broken. So
can I ask you all a question?
Yeah.
What do you think is the most expensive card on pre-order from this set?
Ooh, that's a good question. Sort by rarity.
Well, hold on. Are you looking at like regular art? Because there's like showcase arts and stuff.
I am looking at regular art.
Elder Gargaroth.
It is not that. Stan?
Teferi?
No. It is Grim Tutor, which we didn't even talk about.
Of course. Yeah.
Although, did we talk about Grim Tutor last week?
I don't think we did.
Guess what? I think Grim Tutor is too expensive to do anything in modern, maybe Pioneer. There's my capsule review of Grim Tutor.
Yeah.
What's the second most in terms of normal card land? Not a $200 reprint.
Ugin.
Oh yeah, Ugin, still not cheap.
Yeah, I mean, like in terms of my thinking for this question, I think Teferi is in the running. I think we're still kind of undervaluating how crazy good it's going to be just using Teferi's abilities at instant speed, especially in a control shell that can, protect Teferi. And, last week I was a little skeptical about Eliminate, that 1 and a black removal spell. But after listening to last week's episode and just kind of thinking about this card, I actually think it's just fantastic now. And I'm a little embarrassed by some of my initial takes. And thinking about if Eliminate was around when Oko was a card, how much happier we would all feel. Because we would have like really cheap, efficient Planeswalker removal. I'm not saying unban Oko, but this is kind of like a nice safety valve that I think can have the type of longevity that we even see from Fatal Push.
Totally. Glad to have you on the team, Stan.
Dave, did you pick? Or is it just Snoop?
I think Snoop is the best card. I think that the card I'm most excited to try out, honestly, is the Heartfire Immolator and also Stormwing Entity. Those are the two cards that I'm the most excited to play with. But I think Snoop is something I'm definitely going to try, and I think is probably going to be the card we see the most in our formats in Modern, which is mostly what I think about still. But
gut check on Core 21 as we wind out this episode.
Yeah. It's less powerful than I anticipated after kind of after last week. Like I felt like I was not scraping, but I was definitely not blown away by the next week. I mean, we still have like 95 cards, I think, unspoiled. So they could do something crazy in the final drop tomorrow. Remains to be seen, but it typically is not.
We'll record an emergency pod if we have to.
Yeah. If we get Lightning Bolt in the bulk spoiler, then we'll have an addendum.
Dave, gut check?
Little underwhelmed. I think the marquee cards are a little worse than I thought they were going to be because I'm really having a hard time figuring out where they're supposed to go. A lot of good and necessary reprints, so I'm happy about that. But not a huge thing that's really turning my wheels.
I think this is a power level that I'm comfortable with for standard / premier sets moving forward, where you have like a handful of cards that are powerful but are kind of narrow and aren't going to be Okos that you just like splash into as many decks as you possibly can because of how much value they accrue. And the fact that it's got like Baneslayer and Ruined Halo reprints, even like adding them to Pioneer, I think it's kind of neat. Whether or not they're powerful cards remains to be seen, but just a nice mix of powerful reprints, coupled with like strong cards that are narrow but effective, is something that I would be okay with in Magic sets in general.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of potential here. So
yeah. We'll see what happens next week. It might be too soon for a Sleep, Believe, Heave, but I'm excited to start poring over those leagues, results, and challenges, whatnot, to figure out where people are putting these cards. And listen, wherever new cards are going to end up, you're going to hear it on the Dive Down. And if the Dive Down is the first podcast per week that you listen to on Fridays, you're going to hear it here first. But for now, that wraps up this week's show. If you haven't yet, make sure you do subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out and you find out who's brewing with what from Core Set 21. If you use Apple Podcasts, consider leaving us a rating and review. If you'd like to submit a question to the podcast, you can find us at The Dive Down on Twitter. You can even email us, thedivedown@gmail.com. Many of you probably know that we're in the Modern and Pioneer subreddits almost every Friday. I'm pretty good at responding to people there. If you'd like to support the show, you can join us on Patreon, patreon.com/thedivedown. $1 an episode gets you into our Slack. More money gets you some perks. Do whatever feels right. We'll be here for you no matter the amount you pay us or if you don't pay us at all. Shout out to Mana Traders, of course, for sponsoring the Dive Down. If you sign up for Mana Traders using the promo code TheDiveDown, all one word, you can get 15% off your first 3 months of renting Magic Online cards. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and scavenger. Ooh!